Good morning. I'm Matt Driskill, editor of Asian Aviation magazine and AsianAviation.com. Today we are in conversation with LeAnn Ridgeway. She is the Vice President for Information Management Solutions at Collins Aerospace, which, as we all know, is part of Raytheon Technology. LeAnn, welcome to In Conversation. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, thanks for having me, Matt. Pleased to be here.
LeAnn, first question. We all know aviation is in terrible shape. Words like unprecedented are being thrown around all the time. It suffered tremendously from the COVID-19 pandemic. Very quickly, tell us what Collins has been doing as a company internally to deal with remote working, those types of things, and then we'll get into kind of the tech side of things about what Collins is doing to help everybody else deal with it.
Yeah, excellent question. We know we have not been untouched, just like most industries around the globe, and so we found ourselves in the pandemic, just like everybody else, trying to figure out how do you rush everybody to remote work from home. So we've got pretty much 90% of our workforce has been working from home since March. So very rapidly, we were able to put those procedures in place. Additionally, then we've been keeping all of our essential workers up and running. We have many people responsible for keeping aircraft that were flying up, working with the FAA and the different agencies around the world, as well as keeping airports up and running too. So we were able to get all of our essential workers in place, get their documentation, get those guys out there in the field so they could help keep those that were flying safely. And then additionally, we've been working to improve all of our internal measures, such as when you do come in the facility, you've got the temperature screening, you've got the health monitoring, respooling all of our facilities to be able to work with the social distancing, the six feet separation, certainly looking at how our labs are set up and our configuration of our offices. So it's been really busy. We're starting to have people slowly return to work. Most of our facilities are at the 10% mark, looking to move to about 25% over the next 60 days.
Airports around the world obviously have suffered. I mean, the numbers from ACI World, ACI APAC, and everywhere else obviously are suffering. Organizations like IATA, ICAO, AAPA here in Asia, they've been calling on governments to reopen the borders. They've been calling for testing, pre-departure, things like that. What is your view? And again, I know this is kind of leading into some other questions later on, but does Collins have a view about pre-departure testing? And probably more importantly, are governments listening to people like ICAO and IATA and everybody else that's saying, look, with testing, things like that, you can safely reopen international travel?
I think that's the exact critical point we're at right now. We've been looking at this as a journey, and I think as we looked when the pandemic first hit, arguably it caught everybody flat-footed. We were ill-prepared. Aviation was ill-prepared. So I think after we got through the shock part, we started mobilizing together and started realizing it was going to take all of our industry associations, our airlines, our vendors around the globe and the governments working together to make things happen. I think we finally, working through academia and science, just in the last 3 or 4 weeks, you've seen the fruit of all of the efforts of this collaboration come out and say, hey, it's safe to actually fly on an aircraft. There's measures being taken to improve the airport journey as well, and I'm sure we'll talk about that. But I think where we all are now is realizing that now what we need to do is we need to get these borders open. And there's different methods. We're looking at certainly the pre-departure testing. People are looking at the air bubbles, as they're calling them, or the air bridges, to ensure that everybody in a departure is safe when they get to arrivals and they're not cross-contaminating. So I think right now we're starting to see governments pay attention and listen, that this is what has to happen next. And I think the work that the associations like IATA and ICAO and airport associations are doing around the globe is so important in driving that kind of coalition across the different governments. So I do think we're starting to hear them listen and starting to focus on that. And I think ultimately it is going to take some sort of screening to eliminate, the 14-day quarantines. If we really want to move this progress we've seen in the regional travel, like say in the United States, back to international travel, that's what it's going to take.
For a long time, the industry's been moving to digital platforms. We've seen this. My father hates it. He just bought his first smartphone about a year ago, and he's never sent an email in his life. Actually, he's about 83 now. He'll hate me for saying that, but he doesn't watch my videos anyway. But for a long time, the industry's been moving to digital platforms for a lot of things. It seems like COVID has sort of accelerated the process. I was doing some background reading, and I think you're part of an internal task force at Collins that's working to restore passenger confidence. Trust is a key thing. I mean, it's once you lose trust, it's really hard to earn that back. And right now, for a lot of reasons, trust seems in short supply, whether it's trust in science, whether it's trust in governments and things like that. How is your task force, and how are you and Collins, and I guess the industry in general, how are you trying to work to rebuild that trust?
Good question. Well, I'll tell you what we've been doing at Collins is we've been actively working, as we've been building solutions. We've been working and listening to our airline customers, our airport customers, asking where they need help. Certainly, the big OEMs are involved in really trying to help, bolster up the industry. So they're spending a lot of effort and resources in trying to prove through science and academic research that the methods that we're putting in place are actively being effective. And I think we've been participating at Collins on various studies. One, we were working with Harvard on the study that they just did. Boeing and Airbus were also working there. With ACI was involved in that. AEEE was involved in that. And so was A4A here in the States. And so you've probably seen some of the work come out from that. Also the DoD studies from Transcom came out, all saying that, there's science behind the FSC, that what's been put in place, certainly the HEPA filtration plays a big role in that, to say that it is safe. So I think first and foremost, making sure that we're listening to the customers, and secondarily, making sure that the recommendations that are putting in place are based in science, and that they can statistically be proven by independent parties. Even though we're helping to sponsor those studies, they've all been done independently through both the academia and the medical. So I think that's important to gain trust. I think the second thing that we're doing as we're putting these digital solutions together is making sure that we are doing everything we can to protect PII and the personal information, as well as the cybersecurity hardening that we're putting around these solutions. And certainly being part of the Raytheon family has helped us in that journey, as well, as they've lived in that space as one of the world-class cybersecurity industries for many time, for a long period.
Well, that leads right into the next question. Technology, which is one of my favorite things, especially if you look at my office. I've got more screens than I know what to do with, and my wife she has forbidden me from buying any more computers. Everybody, it seems, is moving to contactless or touchless technology at the airport. The cynic in me says that that's a good way to cut employee numbers, but at this point in time, it's also a good way to keep social distancing going. And it just seems like COVID-19 has sort of accelerated this process. Again, biometrics, smartphones for boarding passes, self-check-in, checking the bags yourself, which I have a problem with. I like flying first class, and I like having people wait on me, but that's because I'm older. I used to, I started flying when you could still smoke on an airplane, so that tells you how old I am. But give us some idea of the technology that Collins is working on to help through this tough period.
Sure. Well, I'll tell you, the biometric journey has been, we've been working on that for quite some time at Collins. The interesting thing is it did have a solid business case for implementation before COVID. So we were really seeing a pull from several airports, most of them being the landlocked airports, as biometrics as being a way to improve efficiency. So processing more passengers more efficiently, quicker, so that you don't have to go invest in property, plant, equipment. So it did have a good business case prior to COVID. Now what we've seen is exactly what you said, is that now you can use those efficiencies to provide for social distancing, to also provide for the contactless part of the journey. So we've been converting, just like many folks with biometrics out there, we've been converting our biometrics into all contactless. So you can use your smartphones to operate, or you can use hand gestures on the kiosk, or however you choose, but ultimately to avoid the transfer of paperwork, avoid that interaction as much as you can with other folks, as well as make actually for a pretty smooth journey walking through the airport. So, you know, I'm like you, I like to fly first class and then be taken care of too. But when that isn't possible for me, or I'm taking economy or something else, I'll tell you, the contactless journey is pretty slick, because I do like walking up, not having to fumble for my documents, not having to fumble for my ID, and just using my, you know, facial scan as my single token to get through everywhere. And so I do find the efficiency for me is enjoyable as well, that, you know, I can just go about my business without having to fumble for everything. So I think we're starting to see a big pull from airports and from airlines to start to implement this technology. Now, because of COVID, I think they're prioritizing it in their list of things they've got to do and they've got to pay for.
I just want to follow up on this, because the question just kind of stuck in my mind as you were speaking. How is this going to affect airport development? Because airports are not designed for social distancing. They are designed to get as many people onto airplanes as quickly and as efficiently as possible. And they're just simply not designed for social distancing or anything like that. In your discussions with your clients and people, I mean, are we going to see changes in the design of airports?
Well, I think ultimately you will, but that takes so much time to get those kind of processes through. I think though, if you look at the statistics of what you can do with, say, like a biometric boarding, you know, pre-COVID, we were showing where you could board an aircraft in about a third of the time with biometrics as you could with fumbling with the papers and that. So certainly that helps. So the way I'm thinking about it is, if you've got that 2/3 efficiency available to you, you can afford at least the time it takes to, you know, to board the aircraft. To your point, the spatial distancing, you know, that's going to continue to create an issue for airports. I do think, though, when we look at things, you know, the airports are looking at different surfaces that they can put in that will reduce the spread of pathogens. They're also looking at how they can improve their HEPA filtration, much like what you see on the aircraft. So there are things they can do that will reduce that need, and certainly take the pathogens out of the air quicker, if you will, so that the social distancing becomes less of a factor, given everybody's wearing the foundational masks. You know, everybody wearing a mask, I think, as science has proven, is the single biggest thing. But I do think we'll see some changes. You could see bag drops and things like that being done at offsite locations. You could see where, when you get to the rapid testing, you could see all of that done outside of the airport, so that, you know, when people approach the airport that they're, you know, they've had their health screening. I think other things we're starting to see is that contactless journey through the airport, also doing things like at the vendor shops, you know, being where you're not transacting payments, using your face scan, say, to get into the airport lounges. So I think those are going to help. I think one new technology that hasn't been employed previously will be things like wayfinding. Having the ability on your smartphone to see if I could go to security point B versus C, and I see that B is very congested, I could choose to go to C and work a few, walk a few more steps, if you will. So I think we're starting to have discussions with airports around how we can employ that kind of technology to help. We're also looking at how we can employ more artificial intelligence to help on the scheduling of aircraft, so that we've got spreading it out amongst the different terminals, so that you've got as much spacing as you can accommodate with the flow of the traffic. And then ultimately, I think the technology on the health screening is going to have to be so efficient that it doesn't impede the passenger's journey, so that you're not having these congestion points, if you will. So one of the things that we're looking at, for example, is in the biometric camera itself is putting the health monitoring right in the camera, so that as the passenger, you don't have to change what you're doing. You walk right through. A few seconds later, you have your health screening without having to change, go do something evasive, or go, into a different area. So it's through the normal pattern. Very minimal disruption, just like the passengers were going pre-COVID. So that's kind of our vision on the technology that we're working towards, and working with our customers with.
I had 3 or 4 questions that you kind of touched on all of them. So I'm going to kind of ask you, I'm going to kind of try to combine them a little bit.
Sure.
One thing you talked about, obviously, was the health screening beforehand. Are you familiar with the Commons project and the Common Pass that they developed, and what do you think about that?
I think that's ultimately where everybody's got to go. We've got to get a common set of standards. We've got to move towards, and that's what I love about biometrics, actually, not only the ease, but I love that it's building a platform, and it's building a platform that ultimately will help us when the next COVID comes through, or COVID-20, where we could easily see, a health passport type of part of our, biometric, dossier, if you will, and say, hey, LeAnn's traveling. She's had these immunizations. She's safe to go here. There's an outbreak over here that requires these immunizations. I think the possibility in the very near future of having that commonality, standardization across the globe, and that cooperation it's going to take will be very impactful. Because I think, you kind of started out our conversation with how devastating that it was to the industry. And I think the worst thing we could do right now is short-sightedly look to solve just for the COVID-19 problem, and then act like nothing else is going to happen in the future. And so I think this having, one eye towards the future, to being able to say, hey, the next respiratory illness that comes along, if we put these types of solutions in place, hopefully the industry doesn't, fall to its knees at a 95% reduction almost overnight. Hopefully then we've learned, and maybe it mitigates it, maybe there's a slight dip in traffic because we've got much more information, much more cooperation, much more, in the way of standards and controls to prevent this for the future.
Well, I just did an interview with Jennifer Zhu Scott, who's the executive chairman of the Commons Project. I'll tell her you approve very much.
Oh, I think that's what's going to take. And I know, it's not lost on me that people get nervous about their personal information, that people get nervous about cybersecurity. But I think at the end of the day, there's ways to mitigate all of that. There's ways to use trusted partners in that. I think there's ways for the global cooperation that's going to prevent this. Because the sad thing is while people tend to think we in aviation are self-serving, is we're a fundamental conduit to the global economy. So regardless of if you're in aviation or not, you're suffering some form of economic distress because of this pandemic. So it behooves everybody to, kind of come together to solve this problem.
Yeah, I just did an interview with Chinese television, CGTN, this evening before I came on with you. And, there's millions and millions of jobs tied to aviation, huge amounts that aviation contributes to the global GDP and things like that. And you keep skipping around, and you're touching on all my questions that I want to answer. One of which was, you just mentioned data security. Excuse me. you know, something like the Common Pass, which again, I talked to the executive chairman of the Commons Project just the other day, and she was saying, you know, that they don't keep personal data, that personal data remains on the smartphone and things like that. With all these moves to digital platforms, the question always comes up about who owns the data, because you know if the what's the saying, if the application is free, then you are the product, you're what's being sold. And so that tends, and again, that goes back to the question we talked about earlier, the question of trust. So how do we reconcile those two?
Well, I think well, for me and I think many people, who owns the data is you, the person owns the data, and you've got to have the controls ultimately on, are you opting in, opting out, and can you change that at any time, and what does that mean when you do that? And I think that's a fundamental premise. And with all kinds of data, I think, you know, that's the number one issue that people are trying to wrestle with. And so I think, you know, there's two different methods kind of being looked at. One is it resides on your smartphone, your smart device, you're in control of that. The others are where the provider isn't keeping the data either, but if it's a database against, say, a governmental database that, like a driver's license in the States or your passport, where you've already kind of opted into that, it's doing a quick check against that, but not keeping the data. So there's two different kind of streams out running right now. I think both of them can work and be effective. But the key has got to be, is it's got to be in the control of the person's personal information, that they can opt in and they can opt out. And then it's the responsibility of those application service provider to ensure that the cybersecurity part of that, you know, remains secure.
Quick question back to the technology that Collins is working with. I mean, and again, I've been on, I can't tell you how many webinars and video presentations, which usually are about this time at night, my time, uh, because they're in the US or Europe or something like that. Boeing had one the other day where they were talking about HEPA filters, things like that. Honeywell's had one where they talk about the UV system it's selling. Uh, is Collins, two questions. Is Collins getting into that area as well with interior disinfection? And then also, I don't know, I was doing some background reading on you, and you were talking about that Collins was getting involved in rapid COVID testing, and that was something that you never thought would happen for a technology company like
Mm-hmm.
like Collins. Can you talk about those two things?
Sure, sure. So yeah, we're involved in not only the airports and that technology, but certainly a major supplier on the aircraft. So we do the air filtration systems, you know, for Boeing and for Airbus. And so we're very familiar, and we've been participating and helping in all those studies. But additionally, we do interiors. So we've been actively ramping up our touchless lavatories, things like being able to put even simple hand sanitizing stations onto aircrafts. Looking at, we've even converted an electronic cabin crew bag so that when you're on board the aircraft, you can order your, you know, order your drink or your meal on your smartphone, so you can limit that interaction with the flight crew. Also, if you're doing the duty free, you can pay that way. And so the cabin crew can then also use the electronic um, uh, mobile device to see what supplies they've got, have real-time inventory. They also can have their passenger manifest, stuff like that on there. So we're looking at all the things that we can do to help improve. Certainly on the interiors group is busy looking at any kind of antimicro uh, resistant surfaces, and also the fabrics and stuff like that that can be used on the aircraft. So we've been actively doing that. We also have some UV studies going for inside the aircraft as well, looking at different things there that could help reduce the disinfection procedures that the airlines are currently using, things that would be more long lasting. So we are actively participating in some of those studies on the interior of the aircraft, and looking to see what kinds of things we can do. And then we're also looking for, we never thought we would get into the health, aspect of it. But as I mentioned earlier with our biometrics, we're looking at right now, we'll be rolling out this month a temperature screening that goes right into the camera, the biometrics. So as you walk through your gate, it quickly takes it, opens it. But beyond that, we're looking at a triple biomarker that we're looking a little bit down the road. So in addition to just being able to catch the current COVID respiratory illness, is we're looking at a triple biomarker that measures O2, respiratory rate, and heart rate, in addition to your temperature, so that it increases the percentage of accuracy, so you don't have as many false negatives. Or if I just ran in from outside and it was hot and it looks like my temperature has spiked, the other biomarkers could come into play to normalize that out. And so we're in some testing phases for that to check and see how that will work. We're well aware of all of the concerns that people have on how much time that will take. And so the parameters we're working around are trying to make it very quick, trying to make it as the passenger walks through their biometric gate. And so still in trials, we're still checking that out. And then you hit on the rapid testing, where we were looking for a rapid test that could be done. Let's say, for example, if it's a point of use, let's say you fail the temperature screening or the biomarker screening, then being able to quickly go over and do a rapid test. And there's a lot of folks out around the globe, looking for that same thing. I think the key will be, can we get it quick enough, cheap enough, and in the parameters that they need to be able to facilitate the flow through the airport? Because as you mentioned, you can't be waiting an hour. You can't have your entire airport waiting an hour for tests, because the volume just can't, sustain that. So we are looking, we're trying, just like everybody else is, to help the industry improve as quick as we can. Certainly outside our field of expertise, but we're working with our Raytheon counterparts that have done more of this than we had traditionally done in Collins Aerospace.
Obviously, COVID-19 has words fail me sometimes, and I'm supposed to be a writer, so that's an amazing thing. But it's changed the world to an extent that I guess the experts thought possible, and even the filmmakers thought possible. If you've seen Contagion, which I've watched about 10 times now, I love the people in the movie, but it's amazing how true to life that movie was. And I think it was done back in 2011 or 2012, something like that. Obviously, COVID-19, it's not the first virus that's hit us. It won't be the last. The more that we encroach on Mother Nature, tearing down rainforest and so on and so forth. How is COVID-19? I mean, the sad thing is also people have very short memories sometimes. How is COVID going to change sort of the long-term view of aviation? Are people going to forget 5 years from now when traffic goes back up to pre-COVID levels, or are they going to remember this?
Unfortunately, I think human nature is, for the most part, I think most will forget. If a vaccine comes to bear, and I think it's going to be directly correlated to the amount of time when the next incident happens, right? So if it's very quick, I think it'll solidify it in people's minds that it's a permanent change. But I think realistically, if there's 10 years before the next, say COVID-20, if you will, I do think people will forget and try to go back to normal. And that's one of my real concerns as a certainly somebody who loves the aviation industry, spent my entire career here, is that we can't let that happen. We have to make sure that what we're putting in place today will do as much preventative for the future, and hopefully preventative and predictive as much as we can. But I think the reality is it's an industry and it's business based. And so you got two dynamics working against. You got the short memory of, our travelers and humans. And then you're also going to have the economic reality of the devastation of the industry. And what means are going to be available for more long-term solutions. You know, it's sort of like you got to live to fight another day, and our airline customers and the airports around the globe are, you know, just trying to stay open, keep their doors open. And so I think it's going to be interesting to see, particularly over the next 18 months, what kind of solutions we put together. And I think being able to work collaboratively for the industry and the better good of the industry, getting governments to work together so we don't have so much waste and time, is really going to be a big solution that we've got to work for. It's going to be a big component of the solution.
LeAnn, finally, I try to end these conversations on a positive note. Sometimes it's kind of hard, especially when tomorrow's election day in the U.S. or Tuesday. It'll be Tuesday my time. It's Monday night your time. But is there anything positive that the aviation industry can look forward to, say, next year, other than a vaccine, of course, and a complete restart of the industry?
Well, I do think actually the positive, I think, will be in opening up, you know, the borders again. And I think that, you know, it's taken us a better part of 9 months just to kind of come out and say, hey, it's safe to be on the aircraft. You know, it's probably one of the safest places to be. The airports are doing their part and getting safer as well. I think in the next year, what we're going to see is hopefully the cooperation around the globe that makes it easy to flow between borders. And I think that's got to be a piece that's going to have to ultimately come together. How much that happens in the next 12 months, you know, it might just start to pay dividends. But I do think that everything's going to be healthier. I think that people are thinking about it now on how, from the passenger experience as well as the passenger health safety, and that's something we haven't maybe had such a high, you know, high focus on. So I know I've traveled many times over the you know, COVID pandemic so far. I think I've traveled. I just flew back yesterday, in fact, and it's never been such a pleasurable experience. Actually, everybody's much more polite. Everybody's respectful of your personal space. People aren't, you know, elbowing you in the back to get off the aircraft as fast. So I personally have found that, and I you know, I get that there's reduced numbers, but I personally found that people are much more respectful. People are much more polite and concerned about the people around them. And so I hope that keeps up certainly throughout the recovery as we move through the next 12 months. And then I think the technologies that they're putting in place, I think are also going to help reduce the friction through the experience. So I'm an optimistic person, so I'm going to say that I think the experience for the traveling public will continue to improve, and we'll see that over the next 12 months as we move through the rest of this pandemic.
Great. LeAnn Ridgeway, Vice President, Collins Aerospace, thanks for joining me in conversation.
Thanks, Matthew.